Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Angela Peacock, and I'm a subject of the film Medicating Normal. I was also trained as a social worker and a therapist, but I was harmed by a psychiatric medication that I took as prescribed, and that caused me to become kind of an advocate or activist, like outside of the system. I also volunteer doing outreach for the film, and I host conversations like this one today. This is our 33rd interview, and today our guest is Vesper Moore. I first met Vesper when we did a screening at Advocates in Framingham, Massachusetts. And I remember they stood up and said, "This film doesn't go far enough." Do you remember that? Like, what about forced medication? What about civil commitment? And I totally agreed with them that yes, the film did not go into that because it was kind of like an introduction, but I'm not here to make excuses. That's how we met Vesper. So I'm going to read their bio. Vesper Moore is a MAD liberation activist, a trainer, a writer, and a psychiatric survivor. They have been advocating as part of the MAD movement for several years and have been the recipient of many social justice and diversity awards. Vesper has brought the perspectives of MAD people, disabled people, and psychiatric survivors to national and international spaces. They have experience working as a consultant for both the United States government and the United Nations in shaping strategies around trauma, intersectionality, and disability rights. They have been at the forefront of legislative reform to shift the societal paradigm around mental health. Vesper is, as a MAD queer indigenous person, has made it their life's mission to rewrite the narrative psychiatry has enforced on our society. Thank you for joining us, Vesper. What does it sound like when I read your bio?
It really makes me look back at a lot of my personal experiences, how exactly I got here. I really think about the years that I spent, incarcerated in psychiatric institutions. I think about, coming out and a lot of the discoveries that I've had over the years and revelations and awakenings. And I think it's really profound, actually. To hear it from someone else.
Right. So that's what I want to get into is, start us off. Like, how did you get here? Like, how did you enter the system? What were your experiences like? How did that bring you here?
Yeah, so I went into the system when I was about, in my teens, in preteens. I spent 4.5 years on and off in different state institutions. And I ended up there with the diagnosis or label, right, of schizophrenia, later on to be schizoaffective. And I think, for me, a lot of my experience in the mental health system, which I've grown to understand for a lot of BIPOC people in the mental health system, was involuntary, that I was not informed of a lot of the practices, information around medication. I was not informed around that one could be involuntarily committed or held for as long as they could, and I think for me it was really like, wow, how does something this atrocious at the time exist? And now I've really dedicated my life to really being like, hey, like, we have to do something about this. We can't continue to allow people who have this internalized sense of ableism and obscenism, and turn to a system that they believe that it's helping them to only further destroy and surveil them. So.
Yeah, so sometimes I like to talk about the waking up process. Like for me, it was like these little intuitions that would happen. Like, wait a minute, if I'm taking all these meds, why am I not feeling better? Or wait a minute, I voluntarily, brought myself to the hospital and I told them I was suicidal. And why is a police officer with handcuffs, two of them, and a plastic wheelchair, why are you greeting me like this? I'm asking for help. So like these things would happen that kind of what I call my waking up process. Like, wait a minute, something is wrong here. Can you share a couple of those maybe for you? Like what was your waking up process like?
My waking up process happened in the hospital. It happened when I was told that a lot of the side effects for Thorazine led to the tremors in my body and led to a lot of the a lot of the apathy I was experiencing.
Mhm.
That was when I realized, like, oh wow, so this is used to supposedly treat me, right? I came here for, for help, in quotes, help, or at least I was convinced that I should come there for help, right? And here I am, now experiencing worse side effects on these medications. Um, and and here I am, like, being on them and not being informed ahead of time about how they would impact me.
Yeah.
I think another revelation later on was how Abilify and lithium interacted with each other when I was taking both of them, and that I was told that a common side effect is actually feeling suicidal, and I didn't know that, and I assumed it was myself.
Wow. Wow. It's surprising that somebody told you it was the interaction though. Woo. Because I've had the same, but I thought it was me. Like I'm suicidal now, you know? Wow. So we both have many criticisms of the mental health system. What are some of the ones that you see from where you sit or that you experienced?
Yeah, I would say my primary criticism of the mental health system is that there is no such thing as a voluntary mental health system as long as we can decide when someone can come off of their medication, if we can decide when someone can, like how long someone should stay in a psychiatric facility, right? They can't just choose when to leave. So even though, I think society tends to really categorize these things as voluntary, involuntary, and I argue that it is all inherently involuntary.
Mm,
Um, and I
that's a
think
good point.
that's one of the primary issues in our society is really involuntary service. But then simultaneously, a service system that's primarily facilitated and designed by people who have not experienced emotional distress in a lot of the same ways, or at least aren't outwardly conveying it or working to replace that experience.
That's a really good point. Yeah. Even if you think of some of the who was this? I can't remember, but I went to the APA conference in New York City, and one of the protests across the street, I was at the protest, and a person was reading a poem. I can't remember the name of the person that wrote it, but they said like art therapy, why isn't it just art? Nature therapy, why isn't it just nature? Why does everything have to be a therapy? So just like the design of like group therapy, and this is what you're going to do in an inpatient ward, and we're going to tell you, you know what I mean, instead of like a downward, like from the people, like what do you need, not it's like we're going to tell you what we think you need, and we're going to name it therapy. It's terrible.
Yeah. I mean, it comes from a largely like infantilizing, like ableist society that's like saying like, hey, you don't know what's good enough for you, um, this is how you are supposed to be, right? This is what convention looks like, right?
Mhm.
Conventional behavior in our society. And if you exist outside of that norm, which again, many oppressed groups do, you're considered mad, right?
Yeah, yeah, good point. So the next one, I just want to be, what's the word for the audience? I know they're saying a lot of terms that you maybe have not heard yet, but I promise I will get to them. So one of them will be in this next question. All right. So when I just graduated from social work school like 2 years ago, and I noticed, we studied a lot about systems, a lot about identity, um, social justice issue, human rights issues, socioeconomic oppression, all kinds of stuff like that. And what I just could not wrap my head around it. Like, wait, we're only talking about like racism, sexism, even people with disabilities were completely ignored. People with mental health issues completely ignored. And it was just like social justice is only for like identities and racism and people of color. But like all those crazy people, like, no, like that's not, like they don't deserve, you know what I mean? It wasn't even mentioned. And not that, and I don't want to sound like I'm being like jealous, like why isn't my identity being mentioned? That's not what I'm getting at. I'm getting at like people with disabilities, like not, you know what I'm saying? There's an oppression there too. So can you take us through like how is mental health a social justice issue and a human rights issue?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, and wow, that was quite the question. I would say, largely with mental health, it's a social justice issue because our minds and our bodies are in our society are supposed to be used for this purpose, right? Where we are serving capitalism largely. And if we do not serve a purpose to capitalism, our bodies are and minds are treated as inherently disposable. That is a large issue, I think, when we're talking about human rights and mental health. That's not often considered. The fact that our value is inherently placed on our productivity, right? I think, largely when it comes to other human rights issues, there is this covert form of ableism and saneism that exists in our society, where we will overwrite a person's right to identify with themselves, their own body, their right to social identity, their right to housing, their right to food, their right to marriage, their right to many things. And we won't even consider it. So, like, for example, when we talk about same-sex marriage in the United States, there's still people who are on SSI or SSDI who can't marry the person that they love because they are both disabled. And that is an issue that we don't talk about, because ableism is something that will continue to be overlooked as long as we accept capitalism the way it currently exists in our society.
And for the audience, when they said ableism, it means if you're not like of a normal ability, like you're disabled in any way, then you are like discriminated against. There's oppressive systems against you. So for instance, the one that I see, because I'm on disability myself, I mean, you get paid like no money. And so you live in poverty. And so our society does not value people that are disabled and can't work for themselves. And they have really crappy, really crappy like Medicare that barely gets a barely, and I'm sorry, I'm like skipping over my words. When you try to go to a therapist, you can't get a good quality therapist because the reimbursement rate is so low. So your care is terrible because Medicare reimburses so low. But then you also live on like $1,000 a month, which is like no money. So, and you have to live in public housing and get food stamps and all these things. And so it's almost like you're being punished because you're disabled, because you cannot work and give to capitalism, right? So that's what we're talking about when we talk about ableism. And then saneism, you want to explain saneism?
Yeah, saneism is more specifically, at least I think, like on the whole social identity piece, one around either being mad or being a neurodivergent person or having a mental health diagnosis, however in which you may identify with it, and being discriminated on the basis of that.
Yeah.
Whereas ableism, we're talking more about inherently access, and again, that kind of being punished for being disabled. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. One example of saneism that always stands out to me is like when your partner or somebody says, did you take your meds this morning? Like, you must be, something's wrong with you. Like just like those jokes, it's not funny, like I have a problem and I'm not happy right now. Or, you're overly emotional. Like, why are you like that? Well, because I'm a human being, not because I'm not normal like you are or something. Right. Oh my goodness. All right. So another thing I like to talk about in our conversations, I just like to hear other people's insights on like, why do we suffer? Like, what is the root of our mental health problems? Where do these problems come from? And I'm just leaving alone the diagnosis system. I don't care about any of that. I'm just saying, like, I know I suffer. I know I grieve. I know I feel things deeply. So like, can you talk about from where you sit, where do those things come from? What are they?
So I'm going to start from a very interesting place and kind of work my way out. We are very genetically similar to mushrooms, for example. Mushrooms share an interconnected network under the ground. When you think about the mushroom itself, it's really just kind of representative of the actual being. And there's like an interconnection, and it's a network, right? So if you set foot in the woods and you're near one mushroom, that other mushroom is going to communicate with the other through a network underground. And I think very much the way in which, emotional distress impacts us, and the way in which we almost socially and societally and emotionally pass that on to one another, is a piece of it. I also think another piece of it too is when we're talking about the generational or the intergenerational impacts of trauma and emotional distress in our families, primarily from oppressed groups, and how that is passed on when you are in the womb, in your mother's womb, and when your mother is in your grandmother's womb, and how that is passed on. I think that there isn't enough around actually studying the impact of trauma in that regard. But there is evidence on how childhood trauma, impacts us and impacts our lifespan and our overall health from a public health standpoint. So, I mean, going back to the mushrooms, it's almost like we live in a social network and a physical network, our body being an ecosystem, and us living amongst each other as a society being an ecosystem as well. I also think about it from a decolonization standpoint. We weren't initially living in the world the way in which it is now. I think a lot of people say like, oh, the world is destroyed, or oh, we're destroying the world as human beings. And like, although yes, we are causing damage to the world, we are causing damage to ourselves. We are making the planet less inhabitable for us, and that largely has an impact as well. You see, the issue of when we're talking about mental health and we're talking about trauma, it is all interrelated. If you grow up in a city, the water you drink is it's likely affecting your concentration because of how polluted it is. And then if you are a BIPOC child like myself, who grew up in the inner city, who grew up primarily drinking water from the tap, and I'm trying to go to school every day, and the supplies at my school are systemically, not up to par because the funding is not good, then I might tend to fail and like leave school, and then I may not be able to be employed. And then there's also the marginalization of being a brown person, right? And a mad person and a disabled person. That is all adding up and interchanging with one another on top of the intergenerational trauma that my ancestors have experienced, my family has experienced. There's a lot of nuance to it. And I guess, when we talk about studies where we do talk about, mental health diagnoses are to a certain percentage, are mostly environmental, right? But then minimally genetic. I think that's where we get into.
Yeah. I know a lot of people say, my bipolar is genetic, my dad has it, or it runs in my family. And I always think to myself, but so does bad habits and abuse and intergenerational trauma. Like, how do you parse out like what's genetic and what was just like your dad was abusive to you and you were reacting to that, and they labeled that bipolar? Like, we just don't know what's genetic, or but I like your emphasis on all the other things that we don't necessarily think about. Air quality impacts asthma rates in inner city kids, and like you said, it has a snowball effect. Like, these little things add up, and then boom, 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 you're homeless and disabled and can't work.
I mean, from a philosophical standpoint, if you think about it, the fact that if you live in a city or a town and you walk on a sidewalk every day and you follow signs, it's inherently dystopian by definition. Like, and I don't think that we think about how we have structured ourselves into society. And that gets into the piece around safety, right? We do a lot of it because of this idea of safety and not allowing ourselves to sit with danger.
So true. Wow. So next question. How do we fix all this? Like, I don't know. I live in a van. It's not a secret. Okay. So I travel a lot, but I'm in nature a lot. And I just went through Yellowstone Park and I started to cry, and I was like, what's wrong with you? And I looked at myself like, am I depressed? Like, why am I crying? And I was like, Angie, it's because you're seeing something beautiful, like the way that it's supposed to be, that not like cars going by and bright lights and people talking to you, and you're like in a natural place. And it's almost like part of my body remembers, like, this is my, like the ancestral part of me or something remembers, like, this is what life is supposed to be like, and I just like let myself weep. But then you drive back to the city, and right now I'm sitting in a Walmart parking lot, and it's like, oh, here's the world again. So I don't know, how do we return? How do we fix all that we've done wrong? I mean, it's so overwhelming sometimes to think about all the stuff that's wrong in the world, and with the way we treat people with mental health.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think when getting into my answer, you touched upon a lot of it. Being connected with your ancestors, what actually, has led to you being you, whatever that means, and having an appreciation of just everything around you. But I think that also feeds into the productivity and capitalism piece that we were talking about earlier, because we are bound to this idea of what our bodies and minds can do for the collective society, which is important to a certain degree, but that we're solely placing our value on the degree of productivity, and that simultaneously innovation is outpacing regulation and how things kind of exist in our society. We continue to expand in a way where we're not actually concentrating on the impact of, placing that value on productivity once again. And we're not slowing down and appreciating, like, oh, okay, I am a living organism amongst a vast array of other living organisms, and everything that I experience and that those other organisms experience impact this larger ecosystem, right? This larger fact that we are, connected and we have collective responsibility. I think a lot of our solutions lie in community and community responsibility and consensus, because I think regardless of what we do, that's what we are doing now. It's just to a certain degree weaponized. We've managed to weaponize community by, again, placing productivity and value on what we can produce.
Yeah, it makes me think about just people are so busy. You have to go to work to be able to pay your rent, to pay your car note, to put food on your table. You don't have time to think about these bigger things, or like, what do I want? What do I need for myself? It's like, no, you have to work. You just have to keep going or you're not going to survive, It's terrible.
And as you describe it, doesn't that sound distressing? Doesn't
Yeah,
it make sense that people would experience distress? It's such a fast pace.
absolutely.
Keep going. You can't stop. You don't have time. Keep going. Yeah.
You don't have time to take 2 weeks off after your grandmother died. You need to go to work. And if you can't keep up at work, then you need to go to the psych ward and take some meds because you're not, let's go back to work, So I know you're involved in so many things. I think I heard one of your talks overseas and you were explaining it from your perspective, and I just thought it was beautiful. Like, these people, the whole room was just listening to every word that you said, like, I'm bringing something new to this group. And I think that's the best part of activism, when people listen and you can make an impact like that. So can you tell me, like, some of the alternatives, some of the things that you're involved in, some of the things that excite you, any innovation in mental health? I don't know, things that you like.
Yeah. I always talk about the idea of, taking, more and more crisis alternatives. I think crisis alternatives are very important. I am an advocate for the Peerrun respite, but I also think that there can be other types of crisis alternatives, or taking the conventional models that already exist and altering them in a way where they are led by those who are most impacted, the disabled and the mad. I also think that there are institutional structures that do need to, eventually need to be fully abolished. But I think with that, we need sustainable structures, sustainable alternatives that are truly community led, and where we have thought about a lot of the ideas of how we can comfortably as a society sit with danger and break out of that, out of this capitalist cycle that we're talking about. Actually, take, almost as you will, like, stick your head above water for a moment and take a breath. And I think, that important piece, I think it lies in things like peer support, but it also lies in healer driven alternatives. It also lies in, indigenous spiritual practices. It also lies in many other things. It also lies in having honest conversations about death and dying, making that more common in our culture, and having a death positive approach. I'm very active in the death positivity movement too. I think that that's super important. It also lies in talking more about social identity outside of access. It also lies in a multitude of conversations, you know, talking about distress outside of diagnosis is at the tip of what we need to do. But I think you know, when we talk about communities, building sustainable alternatives have been important.
I really like what you said of distress outside of diagnosis. Because often people will say, like, I'm depressed, I'm anxious. And I'm like, okay, but what does that mean? Or I was talking to a friend who has a friend or has a son that's diagnosed with schizophrenia. And I said, whatever that means, because it's like, what does that mean? I don't, it's just a word to me. Like, tell me what, you know, it almost like means nothing. Like, it's just a euphemism. I don't even know what that means. Tell me what that means, you know? So I like that you said that. So there's a comment coming in about peer-run communities, and I think I want to go into that just a little bit more so you can explain what that means, or especially the respite. But a person said, I applaud the communities that are starting peer-led homes that provide an alternative to going to the ER during a mental health crisis. The folks who help in these situations must have experience in mental health, incarceration, or some of life's other challenges that can help them connect with the folks in crisis. So can you just share, like, go in depth a little bit more, explain what that means? Because like I said, our audience probably has no idea. So explain it like you explaining to somebody with not one clue what is a peer-run respite home?
Of course. So a peer-run respite is a home-like environment that is, you know, run by an organization, generally a peer-run organization, 51% or more being people with lived experience, with emotional distress, mental health, trauma. You know, psychiatric institutionalization, having that experience is very important as well. And the peer-run respite, being in this home-like environment, serves as an alternative, but also a diversion away from psychiatric institutions, away from emergency rooms, away from, you know, systems of incarceration that exist in our society. You know, peer-run respites, people can stay for a week, sometimes more than a week if they need to. They are short-term to long-term stays, depending on the respite. And they generally have support groups that are led by people with lived and or living experience, and also offer one-to-one crisis alternative support throughout the day, 24/7. So and generally, when you're in a peer-run respite, or rather, it is a requirement of the model, right? That people be able to manage or take their own medication, right, rather than, you know, someone administering it to them, because that compromises the mutuality of the model.
Yeah, that's awesome. I want to ask about peer support also, just that there seems to be like two different strains of peer support. One is where it's pretty genuine, it's very, you know, even cute, kind of like what you're explaining. And then there's the other peer support where it's been hijacked by the mental health system. And my firsthand experience was when I was in the hospital 5.5 years ago, where the movie kind of starts. And the peer person came to group therapy. There was two of them, I remember, and one of them was telling me how she was bipolar. This is before I knew anything about any of these issues, okay? But she's like, today we're going to make you fill out a RAP. It's a wellness recovery action plan. And so she sits down and she's like making sure I'm like answering all these questions. And I remember reading the questions like, I'm not in a crisis. So it's asking me things like, how did you end up here? Like, what can we do to prevent this next time? And it was very like accusatory and like condescending. And I'm like, nothing happened. I don't know how I got here. It just happened overnight. And what I didn't know was the medication, my taper, is what caused the crisis. Okay. It wasn't anything that I was not doing or whatever. But it felt very like she was just a stand-in mental health worker. There was no peer mutuality about it. You know what I'm saying? And I know that she's keeping notes on me and she's putting the notes into my record. So it didn't feel very peery to me. So can you talk about the difference between like peer support in its genuine form and like peer support that's been hijacked? Uh-oh, did I freeze? Oh no, I froze. Can you all see me? Vesper froze, or maybe their phone died. That could happen too. That happens sometimes. I hope not. Uh-oh, everybody stay with me. Okay, they froze, not me. Okay, so maybe Vesper's phone probably died. That's what I'm guessing. We've had this happen before. So I'll just read one of the comments while we're waiting for them to come back. They might not come back. I don't know. It's just me now. Hi, everybody. All right. So somebody commented, you can't always get better because your access to resources is so low. So people treat you like crap for being disabled. But if you need medical help or whatever to improve and you can't afford it, you can't not be disabled because of lack of access. Wow, that was a really good circular thing that you said. So what I'm getting from that is like you can't access good resources, so it almost keeps you sick. And then you can't like get better because then you come off of your, disability safety net and you're thrown out into the world and you don't even know if you can, make it through that or not. It's like a catch-22, right? So I'm gonna scan the comments and see if there's any more while we wait for them to come back. Proactive approaches are really helpful. We are in crisis mode all the time. Yes, who is not? Yeah, someone said they put ideology of therapy onto everything. Art is just art and it doesn't have to be therapeutic. Absolutely. I don't know if they're gonna come back. I have a feeling their phone died. We'll have to do a part 2. This was so good so far. Did you all like it? Is there any questions you have or any topics that really spoke to you? They're still not back. Darn it. I think their phone died, y'all. I'm so sorry about this. We'll have to like pick up where we left off, Oh, this is terrible and I don't really know what to say. Oh, wait, here they are. Here they are. Hold on. Are you back? Yay. Did your phone die?
Yeah.
I knew it. I knew it. I was like, their phone died. Okay. So can we pick up where we left off at? Can you talk about the difference between genuine peer support and the peer support that's been hijacked kind of by the system?
Absolutely. So the peer support I'll start off with the peer support that's been hijacked by the system. I think, again, out of first off an internalized sense of ableism, sanism, that, we are often given this idea of recovery, right? That we're not inherently valuable or that our experiences cannot benefit others unless they are lived and prior, unless if we have recovered, right? We've only made it to a certain extent. Then often those survivors, those mad people, those neurodivergent folks, those disabled folks, will gain a lot of pride in telling their story. It's the first time they've been likely validated in their whole lives, or it might be one of very few times they've been validated in their whole lives. And then they're given a profession where now their experiences, which they've often thought of as like devalued, right, that aren't valuable, are now valuable, right? Your expertise is valuable. You can work in this role. You can do this type of thing. And then all of a sudden, it's at a constant threat of being taken away from you. And because it's at a constant threat of being taken away from you, you end up, although it's uncomfortable and maybe it's viscerally uncomfortable, maybe you're not even fully aware of the ways in which it is uncomfortable to you because you're not really sure how to explore it. But you see someone who is involuntarily medicated, right? You become someone's payee because your supervisor told you that they can't manage their own medication. You tell them that they have to establish this wellness recovery action plan, and that's the only way they can do it, right? Even though I will say, rap, other people
Rap is a good thing. Yeah, if you do it the right way. It's just not the way I did it. Yeah.
But like, and there's a lot of things, right? Like it's this inching, right? But it's like, I don't want to be devalued again. I don't, or rather, I don't want to, admit or really even think about how collectively devalued we are as people.
Good point.
Is also the bigger point. So I would say it's this co-optation, right? It's this nudging to like to again doing things that are counter to your beliefs and more towards what serves again this capitalist, productive, more systemic thing. Now, genuine peer support. Genuine peer support is when we focus on more of the individual and collective connections, and the mutuality and the sitting with and being there with someone, and also advocating with them regardless of what the system may say, but more or even our society may say, but more towards what that person really feels like they need for themselves. Peer support is, if we get into an even more genuine form, it's naturally existing amongst our friends, our family, and our lives. As a profession, it will be inherently corrupted to a certain degree. That is something that I have learned, because if you are attempting to make a profession in which genuine human relationships are at the center of that, but you have structured it, you have tried to mass produce it, you've had a lot of people work in it, it will be. But you can try to maintain the integrity of it as much as possible by intentionally having communities crafted in a way in which communities are actually healing and working together with each other.
Yeah. I mean, I like how you put that, because like you were talking earlier about death positive, and I've never heard it called that before. And I'm like, it's blowing my mind, because I went through an experience where my dog died, and I was like, for 2 months, I barely left the house. All I did was play jigsaw puzzles and cry. It was miserable. And I remember thinking, why didn't I know it was going to be like this? Like, it was so intense and physical, and I felt like I lost a limb, and it was my dog. And I thought, like, I didn't even cry this much over my grandma. Like, what is going on here? But who helped me through that? People. And it wasn't labeled like peer support, like you need to go get some peer support. You know what I mean? No, it was my friends calling me like, are you okay? And I'm like, no, I'm not. So it's like, even when you put that professional label on it, does that water it down? Isn't it just being with somebody? Why do we have to call it something and professionalize everything we do? Wow.
No, it's so true. It's so true. And I think, inherently by labeling it, by structuring it, trying to fund it, put it in, into this category, it inherently does become something else.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. The other thing about, I'm going to lead into psychiatric abolition here with this question, or this comment maybe, like regular peer support, the one that's been co-opted, it also feels like it's a tool of the system to get you to take your meds, to get you to be compliant with treatment. It's very coercive. It's if you have a problem, you need to get help. The message is kind of disempowering. So I don't know, that has been my experience with peer support. I know it's helped other people, and that's just where they are. I'm just sharing my own. But so let's get into psychiatric abolition. What is that? What do you see should be abolished about it?
Yeah. So I always like to start with the origins of abolition, and at least the origins of abolition in the United States, and that's when we're going into like the 1820s, and we're going back to Frederick Douglass, and we're going back to the abolition of slavery, right, in the United States. Slavery, although slavery still exists today in many regards, in many different forms, it is not considered a validly legal system, right? In the ways that psychiatry and the mental health industrial complex currently is. And I think the reason why I'm starting here is that, when there were two groups of abolitionists. There were some abolitionists who said, the Constitution is not for us. We will not do anything that is in line with that. We as Black people who are not of this country, it'll just never serve us or work with us. So those abolitionists really concentrated more in the regard of like, okay, we cannot exist with or work with or even try to find our way out of this. Then there were other abolitionists who thought, okay, so actually, this Constitution says that it's for all people. It's, in this regard, that it is for all of the people here in this country. So we can actually use that as a sustainable way to be like, hey, slavery shouldn't exist, right? And I guess, in the long term, what this means is that even though I feel like we are stuck in this feeling, impossible, capitalist, weaponized systems, right? That simultaneously, when we're talking about the mental health industrial complex, our way to moving forward is to really, first off, remind people of this inherent sense that, people with disabilities, we are human beings, and that we're not being treated as human beings. And I know that sounds simple, but it's actually not. It's socially embedded in such a way in everything that we do, the way we understand ourselves and our society, and the way in which it is inherently structured. I think the importance of psychiatric abolition is first reminding that, like, we are all beings of this planet. We have value outside of that productivity that we were talking about earlier, and that our minds and body, although different, and the stress inherent, that we can recognize the harm that psychiatry and the mental health industrial complex causes. And then, sustainable alternatives, like I was talking about earlier, I think is a big piece of abolition, because you want to have those in place as you seek to dismantle a system, and the reason why I say that is that, at the end of the day, psychiatric institutions still hold our people. Our people are still within them. So we need a place for them to be housed, to exist as we seek to move forward here. Which is why, I very much advocate for peer-run respites. I very much advocate for any long-term, alternatives that can exist. But simultaneously, it's not only about creating alternatives. We have to seek to eradicate the hierarchy that exists. And in order to do that, we need to actually put community, people who are most impacted, in those positions of power to eliminate power. And you see that with peer support. Often with peer support, I imagine, that there are a lot of folks who thought of it as a way of, in the long-term, psychiatric abolition. And then a lot of people end up in those federal or governmental positions, and they forget why they were there in the first place. Or they went in with a very different intention.
Yeah. Speaking of that, one of the things that shocked me was that we don't even count how many people are in psychiatric institutions. Like, people think so less of them. There's not even anyone keeping track of how many people are there and for how long. It's so troubling to me. We had somebody recently write a bunch of emails, and I was in touch with them from the inside of an inpatient. It wasn't inpatient. They were all civilly committed. And the things that they wrote me that they saw in there were just like, I couldn't believe it. And there's like a court case going on, all kinds of stuff. But it's kind of shocking, and it's so hidden away that we don't see it. So we think it doesn't exist. And the average person doesn't think, I'll ever be there, or that could ever happen to me. But I guarantee you it happens to a lot of people. And especially with the film, we see, they'll email us and say, my son had a breakup with a girlfriend. He was put on meds. Next thing I know, he's drooling on himself 4 years later, and he's institutionalized, and then they wonder, wait a minute, was it a bad reaction to the meds? And then they gave him ECT, and then the snowball of treatment just completely screwed the person up. And now they're in a home forever, for the rest of their lives, these things happen and we just don't even hear about it. They're not even worth talking about.
Yeah, I don't think that we talk enough about how medications and these supposed treatments are disabling people and destroying, and in a lot of regards, harming their lives. So
just and even just something more mild, therapy. Recently, I trained as a therapist. Okay, so like I understand both sides of it. Like getting therapy, I did therapy for 15 years, and then I trained as one, and I saw like the inside and the outside. And to me now, I'm like anti-therapy because I had so much therapy. It feels like it's changed me into this neurotic, self-centered, monitoring every single feeling I have. Oh my God, what's wrong with me? I need to get that fixed, and I got to do this inner work.
For social control. A lot of people use therapy as a tool for social control. I don't know if you ever heard about that. I forget where the apartment building was, but there was this apartment building in a large city. I think it might have been New York, and the realty company that was trying to evict all the former tenants hired a bunch of industrial therapists to come in and teach mindfulness practices so they could accept the fact that they were losing their home. So I don't think people think about therapy as a tool of social control enough, or how there's been a lot of occasions where BIPOC people are told that racism is an issue of the past and that they actually have anxiety. Those are just a few examples about
even in grad school, self-care. It's like we are working 50 hours a week in our internship. We have 12 credit hours or 15 credit hours and all this other stuff. And you're telling me to go home and do self-care. Like, I don't have time for self-care because your demands are so overpowering. It felt like self-care was weaponized. Like, you need to just deal with it. And so you need to go do self-care. Like, no, you need to stop putting so many demands that are unreasonable on people. That's, you know what I mean? It's like you eat your young or something. Oh my God.
It's on you to take care of yourself. And if you don't know how to take care of yourself for $50 an hour, I can teach you how,
True. Oh my God. All right. So let's go to the devil's advocate question. I've been trying to do this more often. So devil's advocate. We often hear people when they watch the film, they say, well, yeah, the characters in your film, they were normal. And then the medications hurt them and, made them sick and they got off them, but they're normal again, so like, but there's really people that really do need medication and they really need these treatments and they're dangerous and we can't let them out on the street. And, there's people with schizophrenia, whatever that means. And, all these big words and whatever. So what do you think when people say that?
I think when people approach us in the way that they are and they're just like, hey, like these medications actually help me, I don't immediately want to be like, hey, like, but have you ever thought about this? But I always think it's important to intentionally engage in the conversation where it's like, okay, but how informed were you about the side effects of this medication like coming on? Like, and it's not as a way of shaming the person really, because I think if you have full autonomy to take whatever you would like, for your body or whatever you feel maybe your well-being, but we are not fully informed on what the mental health system is. We are not fully informed on the treatments. We are not fully informed on how to get off of psychiatric drugs. We are not fully informed of the side effects. We are not fully informed of a lot of the supposed advancements in psychiatry. Like there's a new form of Abilify that is this pill that actually monitors how much medication you take in your stomach for a certain amount of hours and reports that to your psychiatrist. There's this degree of psychiatry now that is this, and the pharmaceutical industries, that is surveillance of our body, surveillance of information being used against us and advertised against us. The weaponization of information is a whole other thing too. And I think
true.
Psychiatry and the mental health industrial complex is a conduit for it. Those are the conversations I try to get. But I don't want to be, it's hard. It's you don't want to be invalidating of the person because everyone else in our society is.
Yeah. And I mean, 6 years ago, I would have said the meds helped me. They saved my life. Don't you dare tell me anything about my meds. And it's like, they worked until they didn't work. And then they turned on me and I didn't see that coming. Like I didn't, I don't know.
Or they work in the short term because of how disabling they are, right? And then it's like, how are we defining work here, right?
Yes. What does work actually mean? Work for me meant I didn't leave my house. I didn't talk about my problems. I was quiet and a hermit. So I guess they were working, but I lost my social connection and all that. Yeah. The other thing, you said something else. Hold on. I was going to snag on to. Oh gosh, what was it? Oh God, I can't remember. Hold on.
But
go ahead.
I like what you brought up about work, because even though like you might feel like it's working for you, but it's really because it's working for everyone else and everyone seems happier with how you are. And that is a part of that internalized ableism and how it exists in our society. I don't think people,
they don't recognize that. No, somebody in my family recently was going in and out of the hospital and was having a seriously hard time, and it was scary, and I was scared for them. And someone in part of the family said, somebody text Angie, she's still acting weird, she's saying things that aren't real, she's scaring me. And I thought to myself, we're going to medicate that person because you're uncomfortable? Wait a minute, isn't that backwards? Like, because in her world, she's fine, she's living life, but we want to medicate the person because they make us uncomfortable. It's so backwards. Yeah. Oh, I know. No, go ahead. Go.
I was going to say, oh, you're talking to someone I can't see. I'm scared of that because I don't understand it, and I need it to stop.
But in church, that's appropriate. In church, like you're allowed, but not at home. Yeah. So interesting.
If you're praying to God that we're all supposed to be, right, in the ways in which in a colonized society we're supposed to worship.
Did they? Oh, we got.
Anyway,
okay.
I don't need to forget your point.
Oh, I remember. It was the weaponization of information. So here's an example. On Facebook, about 3 years ago, I posted something about suicide. It wasn't that I was suicidal or somebody I knew. It was just like I remember what it was. It was that I was with friends in person and we were talking about suicide in a car. And I felt very validated because I could talk openly about it, about my experience with those thoughts and feelings and everything. So I just vaguely talked about it. And apparently I triggered some algorithm on Facebook and it deleted my post. And then it tagged something that said, like, if you need help, call this number. And then I was actually at a therapist training while this was happening. So then my post disappears and I'm thinking, oh my God, are they going to send the police to me? Like, holy, like what is going on here? This is so strong. Like, I can't even talk vaguely about feeling validated about being able to talk about it. And so I see this happening in veteran circles a lot. They're trying to predict who's going to commit suicide. I don't like to use that word, but who's going to die by suicide. They're trying to predict that into the future based on your Facebook posts or your Twitter. I just think it's ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah, through the pre-existing algorithm. So they utilize this algorithm for advertising. I'm sure you've noticed that there's been a lot of advertising around different therapies. The therapist is often a person of color, or it's a queer person.
I've seen that, those BetterHelp ads. It's trans women with makeup on, and I'm like, you are exploiting these people. Are you crazy?
Because they're trying to make it seem that it is socially innovative and just to come forward and talk about your emotional distress, right, and go to a therapist, someone in power, rather than someone else in your family, rather than someone else in your own circle, and that is not only profitable because of the information sold and because of now people are pursuing these forms of therapy or the service, but it also allows for industries to keep track of those who are in emotional distress and may be deemed a danger to our society. It's another tactic for surveillance and selling personal information.
Yeah. Wow, we just touched on so many good things today. I'm so excited. I'm just so happy with that conversation. Well, how did you feel about it? Do you have any closing thoughts you want to leave with our audience?
I mean, I really think, when we talk about information and how information is weaponized, I want to advise people to think very carefully about what you post, what you follow, and why. And also when we're talking about the mental health industrial complex and abolition, that we're in a really good state of awakening right now. And some of it might feel more like pseudo awakening and valid, right? But then there's other pieces too where everyone to a certain degree is experiencing emotional distress right now. It's a very good opportunity to talk about how this system, this industrial complex, right, isn't working for us, and how we really need to take a lead around that, and how we need our allies, to really back us up around this. Engage in more conversations around mad liberation and psychiatric abolition.
I love it. Great points. So I know people are going to want to know how to hear more about you, find you, things that you're interested in. Do you have a place I could send people?
Yeah, so you can add me on any social media platform, whether that be Facebook, Instagram. My Instagram's at Vesper _J _Moore. My Facebook is at Vesper Moore 777. And yeah, you can find me on either of those platforms, or you can email me either at my Kiva Center's email, which is vmore at kivacenters.org, or you can contact me at my Madness Network News email, which is vesper@madnessnetworknews.com.
Oh my gosh, I forgot about Madness. Can you please tell people what that is? I just saw you guys launch. Can you talk about that? So sorry.
No, it's all right. Madness Network News is an anti-psychiatry journal from 1972 that spawned a lot of the early beginnings of the international movement, at least from the United States perspective. There's a lot of different points in history, right, that happened simultaneously. And it had been inactive for 35 years. I had worked with a lot of early advocates to kind of resurrect the original journal, in the ways of preserving the historical journal, but also having an online platform where we can create and add more content, share with each other as a network for mad people, psychiatric survivors, and then neurodivergent stuff.
That's awesome. So they can find you on Facebook, Madness Network News. Is that correct?
Madness Network News. Yeah.
I follow it too. That's awesome. All right. Thank you, Vesper, for joining me today. That was a wonderful conversation. I always feel validated when I'm able to talk about these issues, that keep me awake at night. So thank you for all the work you do. Thank you for fighting and just talking about this stuff, bringing awareness to it, because you didn't have to. You could just live your life and, blend in with the crowd and not talk about these things. So thank you for all you do.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, everybody else, thank you for joining our live discussion. If you haven't seen Medicating Normal yet, please go to our website, medicatingnormal.com. We have a few cool community screenings coming up, one with Rethinking Psychiatry with Cindy Fisher, and Cindy Fisher will be a guest on our conversations in a couple weeks. We have another one with Natural Highs in Colorado that's all about teen alternatives. We also have videos on our YouTube channel, and I don't know, just lots of good stuff. We're going to be on PBS in January. I don't know if you know that or not, but we're working really hard to get us on PBS. So hopefully we can bring these thoughts and ideas to more people. So thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Vesper. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for all you do.
Thank you. Take care, y'all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.